All right, so today we're diving deep into a competition that's, well, it's really heating up. China's Guang constellation versus Elon Musk's Starlink. We've talked about this before, but it's not just about launching the most satellites.
Yeah, it's really a high stakes kind of game for who's going to dominate satellite internet, and that has huge implications for well for everybody really.
Yeah, it's not just like, oh, look, a bunch more satellites in the sky. Like, who cares?
Right. It really could reshape like global broadband, how we control data, even national security is tied into this.
It's wild when you think about it like that, almost like, I don't know, some kind of space-age chess match.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're talking about these mega constellations, these massive networks of satellites that are trying to blanket the Earth with internet coverage.
Yeah, and that's the goal of both Starlink and China's Guang constellation, right? So Starlink has over 5,000 satellites already up there.
That's a lot.
It is, and China's aiming for, get this, nearly 13,000.
Wow. So Starlink, which is the brainchild of SpaceX and Elon Musk, they've definitely got a head start in this race. But what makes them so powerful right now? Is it just the sheer number of satellites?
Well, it's partly that, right? I mean, they've got a lot up there,
Yeah.
but they're also able to launch them so cheaply. They leverage SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 rockets, and that really cuts down the cost.
Makes sense. Cheaper to launch, easier to get more up there.
Exactly. Plus, they've got this network of ground stations all over the world, and they're using these laser intersatellite links so they can transfer data really fast, even in places that are super remote.
That's impressive. Okay, so they've got the infrastructure. They're launching quickly. But it must be some challenges, right? Nothing's ever that easy.
Of course, of course. So one big one that they're facing is actually from the EU. So the EU has this initiative called OneWeb.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and they want to create a European satellite internet system. So obviously that competes directly with what Starlink wants to do globally. And I think it highlights this growing concern that people have about a single company, especially a US-based company, having so much control over space-based internet.
Yeah, and that's where China's Guoan comes in, right? They're trying to catch up, but I imagine they've got some big advantages with their government structure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, China has already shown what they can do in space, right? They've got the Tiangong space station, they've sent missions to the moon and Mars, and with Guoang, they can really streamline everything. They can put a lot of resources behind it very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, when you have that kind of central planning and funding, things can move quickly.
Hmm.
But are there downsides to that approach? Can they really keep up with Starlink's technology?
Well, they've got some hurdles to clear, for sure. I mean, Western sanctions on technology are a big problem for them. They've got to develop their own independent supply chain for building these satellites, and that's not easy.
No, that takes time. And this is where things get really interesting for me because it's not just about the technology. This is geopolitics at its finest, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a big deal. The US and its allies are definitely watching China's space program very carefully, and there's a lot of concern about what these mega constellations could be used for from a military perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if a country can monitor troop movements or gather intelligence from space or even disrupt communications, that's a game changer.
Exactly. And from China's perspective, they see Starlink as this tool of Western influence. They're worried it could be weaponized against them.
That makes sense. So it's a very complex issue with lots of perspectives.
It really is. This tension goes way beyond just internet access, right? It's about who controls all the data that's flowing through these low Earth orbit satellites. And that has implications for everything, economic activity, national security, the whole nine yards.
So who's going to win this space race? I have a feeling it's not as simple as counting satellites anymore.
Right. I mean, Starlink's ahead right now, but China's gaining on them fast. Some experts think that Guam could have just as many satellites in orbit by, like, 2025.
It's just a couple of years.
It is. But, the real question is, what does winning even look like in this scenario?
Yeah, that's a good point. What does winning look like? Is it about having the most data? Is it about giving people the cheapest internet access? Or is it about, I don't know, setting some kind of global standards for all this and making sure that space is sustainable with so many satellites up there?
All of those things, really. And that's what makes this so complicated. If one country or one company ends up dominating the satellite internet market, that has huge implications for the future.
Absolutely. And we're talking about internet freedom, data security, even the potential for conflict.
Exactly.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that the competition between Starlink and Guang is just, it's the beginning, really.
Yeah, we're just seeing the start of this.
What started as this technological innovation has turned into this huge geopolitical struggle over who controls space-based internet.
And it leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Do we want a space internet that's controlled by private companies or by national governments? And what role should international cooperation play in all of this? How do we make sure that everyone has access and that this technology is used responsibly? These are questions that everyone needs to think about, not just scientists and policymakers.
Absolutely. So as you keep following this space race, keep those questions in mind. It's a fascinating topic, and it's only going to get more important in the years to come. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.